Good morning. Here we are at the Samuel Shivers House on a bright sunny day in our series of videos in preparation for the candlelight tour in Woodstown on December 7th. We wanted to stop by this morning and speak with Gregg Perry and learn a little bit more about the Sign of the Key Tavern, which is the oldest tavern in the state of New Jersey. Let's find out more.
Oh, hi, welcome to the Shivers House. Let me make a move first, because Ben Franklin stopped over. He was down meeting with Caspar Wister for some scientific glass. He wanted to get into a quick game of chess before he got back on the horse to Philadelphia. So contemplating my next move. And Ben can't get the kite thing out of his mind here, the electricity thing, but he's been stiff there for a while. But anyway, okay. Welcome to the Shivers House, and I'm Gregg Perry, owner and curator of the museum. This is Ben Franklin, and this is Sage Franklin. He's doing some cleanup here. I guess he's cleaning up some bugs off the carpet, but he's the new curator of the house. Let's take a walk into the tavern. We're going to talk a little bit this morning about taverns in general, part one of our Continuum series. Oh, what do they have to drink here? I don't know. Well, the tables are low. I can't imagine. Anyway, welcome to the Sign of the Key Tavern, part of the Samuel Shivers House. The tavern dates back to 1669. Again, as we spoke in passing, it's once located where the corner bar now stands in Woodstown. So this would have been the original corner bar. I'm not sure that's a good omen to talk about, but nevertheless, it was the Sign of the Key was the name of this establishment. So we're going to just talk a little bit about taverns in general today, and we'll have a continuum of a series here. But as you can see, we're avidly putting the tavern back for the Christmas tour coming up on December 7th. It's going to be from 4 o'clock. We're going to open it an hour early for the public. We have so much demand for people to come in to 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. So, we're somewhat decorated here with the accoutrements of the period. Trying from inventories to put back into the tavern what was originally here. And we'll have just some slight festive decorations as they would have done it in the 17th century. Okay.
So Gregg, can you tell us, would this be a common size and type of tavern for that time period?
For this time period in the 17th century, taverns were very small, comprising approximately 20 by 24, 20 by 30. 2.5 stories, timber frame construction. These taverns in the 17th century, prior to communities being established, were a bit on the rogue side because there was no licensing or anything of that sort. So you build a structure and you open a tavern. But soon after this was opened in 1669, the county seat of Salem soon after followed, and then the Quakers were the dominant force there. Although the Quakers, the Quaker religion, I don't think is steeped in much alcohol consumption, but yet they're very entrepreneurial, and they found that they were going to make a lot of money on the tavern trade. But in the same token, it was a building of community that they were interested in. Community around what would have been known as West Jersey.
And what would have typically been served here at these taverns?
Well, service at the tavern, depending on the tavern, these early taverns would have been basically cider. You would not have had wine in the beginning. Wine came out maybe the 1690s, and then some strong beer or strong ale, basically from England. But the history of these taverns goes back, I guess it's best compiled from William Penn, from Billy Penn in Philadelphia. We think of him as very pious and pure, but he was a hungry entrepreneur in Philadelphia. And Penn, in the grid layout, the Quaker mentality layout of Philadelphia, saw the tavern as the amalgamation of public, of different tribes, so to speak. And dealing a lot with Franklin in the day, they conspired where to put the first taverns in Philadelphia and how to use them. For instance, consider Philadelphia at that point only had 500 people, but you still had an affluent area, which would have been, somewhat like Chestnut Hill, the main line, which wasn't there then. What we're just saying is you had more affluent people with single homes. You had homeless people, you had lower class, middle class. So the taverns were placed accordingly around the city, the burgeoning city, so to speak. And tavern life worked around these classes of people. But in the tavern, all classes mixed and mingled. That's what made the tavern. So the tavern was a melting pot, and the tavern was essential for everyday life. The tavern was a place where people had to find out their information. They didn't know what England was doing pre-revolution, during the revolution. Now we're advancing 130 years from this tavern when it was in its infancy. But people needed to be informed. But probably one of the more important and interesting things on a psychological basis when you dwell into the mindset of the tavern goer, it's no different than the club goer, the disco goer of the 70s, the hip hop goer today. They have in their own mind who they want to be, who they want to be seen like, where they want to go. If you have sports bars today, these people love sports. So taverns migrated into these very specific venues around Philadelphia and the other major cities, which is very interesting. And the other thing is that people were born on farms. And to go into a small hamlet, such as the name of Woodstown, to go into a dwelling where you saw another 15 people, you just wouldn't see that in the day. And this was very intriguing to people. You may meet someone of the opposite sex, but it's basically an information gathering. You're learning communication skills. People didn't talk well. People didn't know what the concept of time was, and or drink or of food other than foraging on your own farm. So these things were learning experiences right up through Philadelphia.
And did you say that some of these taverns were used for multiple purpose, such as a mail dropping point once?
Yeah, well, this particular tavern was used for mail drops, and as you can see, the bars on the side here, someone could slip mail out to a patron. Sometime they had small boxes in the back. Who knows, 10, 12, 30 at max, for the riders coming in. And pamphleteers were big. That was your type of newspaper. Instead of a newspaper, was a pamphlet. It may come around once a month, once every 2 weeks. So pamphlets would have been put out on the cage bar, and people would have found their news that way. But revisit that, the tavern back into Philadelphia and how it evolved. A lot of these started on the riverbank in Philadelphia as caves. And the land was essentially free, and Billy Penn and the other founders found it acceptable for people to dig trenches in from the river 30, 40 feet, maybe 20 feet wide, and brick them. And they were subterranean taverns where people were meeting. But a lot of nefarious stuff were going on in these taverns. A lot of prostitution. Prostitution was huge in Philadelphia right from the start, and William Penn was a proponent of that. And he felt that was needed actually to propel a society at that point, along with a lot of drink. And who were the tavern, who ran the taverns? Amazingly enough, it would have been people who were down and out, indigent people, and the biggest amount of tavern owners were women, and widowed women. Why is that? Because widowed women had raised a family probably. They knew how to take a house, maintain a property while their husband farmed and went out and killed the food for the family. So she was well equipped to take care of a tavern. So Penn and others who set up on a regional basis and on a local basis, the layout of taverns, as far as the number of taverns go, would be looking for someone who was in dire need of income to survive. And widows were prime, or someone who was down and out. They're not going to let this go. We don't want the movers and the shakers with a lot of money setting up taverns. They're going to use it just for profit, come and go, sell the establishment after they build it and get it going. So the other classes of people, the lower classes of people, would tend to maintain these taverns in the long haul.
And can you give us a better idea of where you are as far as the restoration completion of the tavern?
Well, this tavern was originally comprised of 2 rooms downstairs, sitting in the cage bar room, and the room on the other side, which I'm facing now, which would have been the large 12-foot wide open hearth fireplace. This would have been the back of the tavern here, and generally in the period, the tavern would have had no windows on the back, the bottom, or the top, the second floor. These were put in subsequently after the tavern was moved here to architecturally blend in with the Shivers House once it was joined up. Windows were expensive. The Crown taxed per pane and size of pane, and it was a security issue too. So remember, a lot of these people that came and were hanging around taverns were quite nefarious. I'm sure they'd want to break in the tavern at night while the keepers were upstairs sleeping or in their adjacent dwelling, and hence that's why we have a cage bar, because you couldn't trust people then. And I'm not sure you can trust people today, so I don't think times have not changed. And just to add something, the Billy Pens and the like held great oversight over taverns. They're looking to squelch any type of gambling, and they would have gambling, prostitution, but yet they would have had certain taverns around town at certain key points that gambling could happen, prostitution, and getting drunk and getting rowdy. But in your typical tavern, things had to be very, very quiet because they were orientating not necessarily toward families, because basically it was males coming to the tavern. You'd have very few females ever enter the tavern. But again, you would have had as we would term the lower scale of life coming in, trying to raise ruckus and things like that. That's not what the good solid tavern owners were all about or were interested in. Just a few words about the continuing licensing of the taverns. A lot of the Quakers were setting up the communities and these tavern life, and who would get licenses. They would do interviews. So number one, they would actually pick who would get the license. And in doing so, a lot of these people didn't have any money, but they had a need to survive, and they were very hungry, as we just mentioned. So they would be paying off their license over a duration of 5 to 10 years for the tavern. And in addition to, they'd have an annual renewal fee that they'd have to pay. So they have to be making a little bit of money. And the Quakers tried to make a grid laying out these taverns every 8 to 10 miles, as far as a man could go on horseback in a day. And keep in mind, when this tavern was sitting where the corner bar now stands, you go there today and you see fields, a graveyard, and the Wawa. Back then, it was solid trees. A squirrel could go from Maine to Florida, never touch the ground. So this would have been a timber dwelling in the forest, and you would have had a path for 2 wheels or just horseback that originally the Indians made, the footpath, and it evolved into the wagon path coming to the tavern. So you would be in a plethora of tight trees coming to this tavern. Almost inconceivable what it looks like today. So anyway, that's it from. So I've had several questions of how do you find your information about the tavern and things of this nature. And what we tend to find in the last 100, 150 years, a lot of people in this county and subsequent counties and in general up and down the East Coast love to make up their own history. They get an older house and they love to say Washington was here and Ben was here and Tom, Dick, and Harry were here and they did this and that. And when you really dig, you find out that wasn't the truth. So being a restorer, conservator of wood and architectural preservation, when you get into the walls, you can tell things. I was able to tell where the cage bar window was by the framing inside of the wall. And it's been framed over probably for 175 to 200 years. So the great thing is I was presented with 3 diaries and inventories of John Shivers, the father of Samuel Shivers. And that tells about this tavern from its onset to its closing in 1724. So all that information is very rare. There were very few, no newspapers in the day, just the pamphleteers, and they weren't talking about architectural buildings and that. Everyone's worried about their freedom and fighting and where you're getting your next meal. So the information thing is very difficult. So very fortunate to find this. And some of these things, like this tavern, has fallen through the cracks, which is, it would have been a shame to lose it. So. Hi, we've just been joined by the curator coming into the sign of the key in the Shivers House Museum, Sage Franklin. Sage was born down where Caspar Wister had his glass empire and where Benjamin Franklin met on 2 occasions. So he's a descendant of the Franklin enclave. But so Sage keeps things candle straight and things like that, fringes hanging well in the windows. So he's a good addition to the staff here, and he keeps rodent control. So it's a very important thing here at the Tavern. But don't forget to join us on the December 7th for the Christmas tour. You'll see Sage will also be here. He'll be here in his bow tie. I'm not sure he's going to have his hat on, but he will have his bow tie on, his plaid bow tie. But so please come by and see us on the Christmas tour. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for your time.